Good afternoon. How's everyone doing? Woo! Wow, these lights are bright. Great. Well, welcome to San Diego. This is my adopted hometown. I am really sorry the weather here sucks. So no, we're thrilled to be hosting the Clio conference this year. Not that I had anything to do with it, but obviously we're always happy when conferences come to San Diego. My name is Cynthia Morgan-Reed. I am the founder and CEO of Vanst Law, which is a virtual law firm that I founded about a year ago that's based here in San Diego. We're going to talk about three things today. We're going to talk about toxic law firm culture. We're going to focus in on one aspect of toxic firm culture, which is compensation. And then I'm going to uplift you, I hope, into the possible solution that you could consider to apply for yourself and your career that can, I hope, lead you to have a more happy, sustainable profession. So let's start talking about one super fun topic, which is toxic law firm culture. How many of you here believe that at some point in your career, or maybe even currently, I hope your boss is not sitting next to you, you may have experienced toxic law firm culture? Oh, I saw hands go up before I even finished the question. I love it. Okay, so the majority of you. What would be some adjectives that you would use to describe toxic law firm culture? And just go ahead and shout them out. Harassment, bullying, apathy, sexism, favoritism. One more. Cronyism, and there was one here. Sorry. Lack of opaqueness. Yes. Lack of transparency. Good. Well, you got quite a few, and I think they're all accurate. So I'm going to focus on three that I think contribute the most to toxic law firm culture. The first is poor communication. We've all experienced the level of communication in a firm that comes out through your firm leadership, through an email, or maybe through a press release where you understand new hiring decisions or direction of the firm. That's official communication. We also probably have experienced in our law firm careers the unofficial communication that occurs with your assistants, colleagues, and other staff members that give you information that is not come out from the leadership. And that could be a huge problem, right? Let's just call that what it is. It's often gossip. That can create instability and stress within law firms because you're not hearing that directly from your leadership. You don't know if what you're hearing is accurate or not accurate. I'll give you an example of poor communication that I experienced in my career. I've been practicing law now for 20 years, and in my 20 years of practicing law, I have had 2 reviews as an attorney in 20 years. That's probably not uncommon for many of you here. You probably have not had very many reviews, or maybe some of you have had no reviews at all. Of course, as you can imagine, both of those reviews occurred right before I was potentially going to make partner for the 2 years prior. Now, it was great. At least they had a review system, right? At least they were having some kind of criteria or filtering to determine whether someone was going to be applicable and ready to be making partner at the firm. The problem was, though, that the communication that was given to me, even in that peer review, was very poor. It was basically a checklist that said, meeting expectation, not meeting expectation, neutral. I got no actual substantive feedback from any of the partners that gave me a review. And the feedback was there. They had asked partners, they sent out a questionnaire, open-ended, go ahead and rate this person who's being considered for partner. You can write in what you want to write in. I never saw that feedback. I did see it once. And that was when a male partner, who was a peer of mine, after I made partner, asked me the rhetorical question, hey, did you ever see the feedback I gave to them about you becoming a partner, your peer review? And I said, no, I didn't. He gave it to me because he knew they had not given it to me. It is the only written piece of evidence I ever had from my law firm career that stated what someone actually thought my capabilities and skill sets were. Could you agree that's poor communication? Yeah, seriously poor communication. The other issue that I've experienced, and you have probably also experienced since it was actually shouted out here, is lack of transparency. And lack of transparency is obviously a huge issue when you don't know what the expectations are for you as a career professional. A lot of the lack of transparency that I've experienced, you've probably experienced, and exists in a toxic firm culture is often tied to compensation. By a show of hands, how many here in the audience know the compensation formula by which they're compensated at their current firm? Okay, it's not a lot, guys. You probably can't see, as well as I can, into the audience. For all of you, it's not a lot of folks that raise their hands. And that's a problem. It was a problem for me when I was at that firm about to make partner. When I had started there 5 years earlier, I was thrilled because they actually shared all of the base salary information for all of the partners at that firm. And I thought that was revolutionary. I'd never worked at a firm prior who had shared the information of what the partners made. So I thought, great, they're transparent, I can see what my peers are doing, I can understand how I'm doing in relation to my peers, this is super. Of course, they did not share how people were compensated based on a bonus structure. So at the end of the year, if you met your hourly requirement, there was a discretionary bonus. And right there, the word discretionary, right? Somewhat problematic. And so I never knew what the discretionary bonus was for my peers. They didn't know what my discretionary bonus was. I didn't even know the formula other than if I made my hours, I could likely be entitled to some additional compensation. That lack of transparency, as you probably all have experienced in your professional life, is a problem. Now, Vanst has grown phenomenally in the year that we've established. And I've had the opportunity and privilege to interview a number of attorneys who had considered joining the firm. And one attorney that we had the privilege to interview is currently at a top 25 law firm. She went to a top 25 law school, and she approached us about potentially joining. One of the questions I love to ask people in an interview is, do you understand how you are compensated at your current firm? Because as we all could probably agree, compensation is fairly important. It did not shock me to hear her answer, which was no. Because as we just saw by show of hands, majority of you don't know how the compensation formula works at your firm. She then followed up with the favorite phrase I love. It is in a black box. Her compensation formula is in a black box. I said, okay, do you like that your compensation formula is in a black box? And not to any surprise, she said no. That's a huge issue, I think, personally, when I don't know how I'm going to be compensated, I don't know what the expectations are because they probably haven't been communicated to me, and I don't know what the expectation is that I can meet to ensure that I'm going to have a good experience in my professional career. The third issue that I've experienced, and you have probably as well, is a failure to appreciate. So this isn't just about, gosh, do they have associate activities, or, are we thanked at the annual firm holiday party for all of our hard work for that year because, gee, we raised, X amount of money that we, had as a firm, and we've had this many hours that we all billed collectively, and isn't that great? That's not that appreciation. What I mean by failure to appreciate is failure to look at you as a human being and what you bring to that firm. Again, calling from my own experience, which is not unusual, I'm sure, when I gave notice at my last firm, that firm had an executive director that ran the day-to-day operations. So when I scheduled the meeting to talk with the managing partner to give my notice, I asked that the executive director come in and bring my personnel file. And I knew it was important for that executive director to bring my personnel file in, because I had a really keen sense that the managing partner had no idea what my worth or value was to the firm. So I give my notice, and immediately I get attacked. And I'll tell you more about that story in a moment. But the key phrase that the managing partner said to me was, well, isn't this great? You've taken advantage of the firm for the last couple of years, not pulled your weight, and now you're giving notice. And literally threw something across his desk, which was also great for emphasis, right? And I turned to the executive director who was sitting next to him, and I said, could you please pull out my numbers? And he did. And I could see by the look in his face, he already knew the question that was coming. And I said, could you please tell the managing partner what I've made for this firm the last 4 years? And he could. And I knew those numbers because I had them in my lap. Now, maybe that's just a bad manager, right? But the reality was that that managing partner and that firm knew nothing about the value that I had brought to that firm, knew nothing about me as a person. And this was not a huge firm. This was like a 70-person firm. Maybe that's huge for many people, but it's not a 200, 3,000-person firm. This was a mid-sized firm. And that contributed to my lack of satisfaction and my willingness to leave that firm because I did not feel appreciated. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about traditional law firms and the compensation model that exists in traditional firms. And I'm saying this to you fully realizing that probably 90% of you exist in traditional law firms. So what I have to say is going to potentially make you feel a little bit uncomfortable. And I'm okay with that, and I hope you are too. Because what I want to talk to you today about is another model that you may want to consider. I refer to traditional law firms as pyramid schemes, right? We're all familiar with pyramid schemes. Right. Thank you for laughing. And it's true, right? So the traditional law firm model is based on the pyramid scheme aspect of you get all your minion associate attorneys at the bottom slaving away with their billable hours to create a lot of money for the people at the top. You have your income partner in that middle level who is really partner in name only because they're also slaving away to generate a lot of money for the people at the top. And then, of course, you have the lovely people at the top who are probably making a lot of money and more than likely actually founded the firm. The problem I have with the traditional law firm model is not only the pyramid scheme, which I think is not conducive to a balanced, humanistic approach to practicing law, but I also have a fundamental problem with how it compensates the attorneys. In a traditional firm model, 30 to 50% of what you're collecting as an attorney is going back to you, which means that the equation of 50 to 70% is going towards the overhead of the firm and to the equity partnership compensation. So maybe we're all comfortable with that. I was at one point in my career comfortable with that. At the firm that I left, I was making just under half of what I was bringing into the firm. The problem with that is we've talked a lot at this conference about the client-centric model. We've talked about how we can be better for our clients. Clio is a technology that can help us do that. What's missing from the equation is you. You as people, and how you feel and what you bring to your career in terms of your happiness and your satisfaction with your career. So what actually is going for that overhead is the office space, personnel costs, and literally at one law firm I worked at, the equity partner's country club membership, which he was more than happy to talk all about. So I personally will say that I think traditional law firms have a people problem. And we would be remiss if we did not address the fact, and it's a fact that we are all familiar with, whether we have personally experienced it or have friends, colleagues, or family members that have experienced it, that our profession has one of the highest rates of suicide, depression, and substance abuse. I'm sorry I'm not telling you some uplifting statistics right now, but I want to emphasize to you why I feel this is so important and why I think the traditional model contributes to those issues. Because we are working hard to generate income that is not benefiting us. And that's a problem in my mindset. If I'm working hard, I feel I should be entitled to be paid what I'm worth. And in a traditional model, you're not. I also think the other component of the traditional model in which there is a people problem is with women and minorities. When I graduated law school 20 years ago, I so naively thought that because my graduating class and the majority of graduating classes that came after me were going to be 50% women and 50% men, that we would soon create an equity in terms of the partnership ranks of women to men. That has not happened. In fact, the average percentage of women who are partners in law firms is at about 24% and has hovered there for the last 10 years. Stagnant to no growth. In fact, last year we lost a percentage point. Minority statistics are even more dire. It's in about the 16% range. So I think that traditional law firms are creating problems, instituting problems that already exist because women and minorities did not encompass a large-scale percentage of the workforce, and traditional law firms do not foster the growth of women and minorities. We could go in and talk a lot about that, but I only have an hour. So I'm a woman problem, right? The reason I left my firm was because when I was about 6 months pregnant, I started suspecting that I was not being compensated what my true worth was. I had almost $500,000 book of business at the time. I was practicing at about the 13 to 15-year level. And I knew that I could be compensated more because my firm had the reputation of not paying its attorneys at equitable rates to other law firms. Luckily, I had a really good friend who was practicing in a similar area to me, but in a larger law firm. And she shared with me some very important information. She told me what her salary was. By a show of hands, how many in here have ever shared their salary with anyone other than their spouse or significant other? I am so proud of all of you guys. That's awesome. And I hope that share was with a colleague or someone, an associate or below level, so you could help inspire them and encourage them to understand what salaries looked like. She shared that information with me, and even though she was at a bigger firm, she was billing more, and she had a higher billable rate, it was drastically different than my salary. So I didn't want to just take that sort of anecdotal evidence. I decided I'd create an empirical situation for myself, and at 6 months pregnant, I would just go out and interview, because that's what you do when you're 6 months pregnant. That's really fun, and people don't look at you sideways. No, they don't. Because I can't ask if you're pregnant, maybe you just had a big lunch. So I did that. I found a firm that was willing to pay me $100,000 more than what I was currently making. Now, it wasn't because I'm awesome. It was because they saw the value that I could bring to them, that I had a decent book, and they knew, of course, that I was going to work hard, I was going to have to bill more hours, and likely have to pass on a higher billable rate to my client to compensate for that additional compensation. So what did I do, of course, with that information is I went and I asked for a raise at my current firm. I said, hey, I do think that I'm undercompensated. Like all of you here probably in the room, unfortunately, you went through that last recession, and I took a hit, as many of you may have as well. And so I knew that when I came into that firm around 2010, I was not being compensated at the level I could be compensated, but I was happy to be there, and I thought I would make it up. And I didn't. For lots of reasons, but it didn't happen. So I decided, with this new information, I was going to go in and I was going to ask for not a $100,000 raise, but a $30,000 raise, because I thought that was equitable, to try and help me catch up. I was told that I was not going to get a $30,000 raise, I was going to get a $15,000 raise, and I was told I wasn't getting a $30,000 raise not because of experience, not because of my value in terms of my book to the firm, and not because I wasn't deemed or had the reputation as a good attorney, but because the firm told me I was already making too much money. I knew that wasn't the case, right? But I knew that's what the firm wanted me to believe. So I left the firm. I started my solo practice when my daughter here was 4 months old. I put this picture in because who doesn't love a cute baby? She'll be mortified if she knew. She's 4.5 now and into superheroes and princesses and not putting her fingers in her mouth. And I started my solo practice because I knew I could, I knew my value, and I wasn't going to settle for being treated less than what I was worth. So 3.5 years into my solo practice, I'm doing great, I'm generating a good amount of income. I actually publish every year what I make. I've published every year what I make since 2017 on my LinkedIn articles, if anyone wanted to look that up. And I do that because I want to encourage other people to do the same and to know what kind of rates are out there. And I decide in 2018 that I'm just not satisfied. And I'm just not satisfied because I keep hearing these stories from all of my friends, my colleagues, my former associates at the firm, that they are too experiencing the kinds of discrimination and unhappiness that I had experienced at my traditional firm. So I looked around and I started doing research and I said, what else is out there? I mean, solo's great, and if you're a solo, awesome, because I love being a solo. And I wanted to do something more. I wanted to do something bigger. I wanted to do something that was more groundbreaking and changing of the environment from which I had come than what I had previously, or what I was currently doing. So I found this concept of virtual firms. How many of you have heard of virtual firms? Awesome, a lot of you, and I'm glad. So I am not on the cutting edge of this, let me tell you. I am like one of those second adopter people. I don't even have an Apple iWatch. My husband makes fun of me. He's like, will you just get an Apple iWatch? I'm not a huge technology first adopter person, but I am definitely a second adopter. And so I found the virtual firm concept, and I was like, this is great. This is great because you can now rely on cloud-based software. I mean, I'm just going to do a shameless shill for Clio right now, right? Obviously, I'm here because of Clio. And we found Clio. We loved Clio. Clio allows us to be anywhere in the world doing what we do best for our clients, which is practicing law in a sophisticated and experienced way. The other aspect of virtual law is we do not have the large overhead, right? We all work from our home or from shared office space. I eventually hope to work from Spain. That is my dream. I'm putting it out there once again, because if you put these things out there, they will happen, that I want to go work a couple months in Europe, and I'm going to use that as my office, right? Wherever I am, my Airbnb, whatever it is, that's what I'm going to do. So you can do this. You can work virtually. You can work when you want, where you want, how you want, so long as obviously you're keeping your client happy, which is always really important. Because we don't have that overhead, though, we can pay our attorneys 70% of what they collect. I like the whistle. I like the whistle. Thank you. It's sort of revolutionary, right? And yet it is not. It really isn't. But it is. And so I was like, this sounds great. Why don't we do this? Why don't we actually give attorneys the payment of which they are worth? Pay people what they're worth, and they're going to be happy. We also provide lower rates because we do not have the need that a traditional firm has to pass along those rates at a higher amount to pay for that overhead. And we have found that, frankly, we can provide better services to the clients because clients are happier, the attorneys are happier. It's a win-win situation for everybody. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about the comparison between virtual and traditional. This is kind of going to be a no-brainer for you, but freedom, flexibility, and financial success. Those are the 3 F's I will talk about all day long. Because, again, you can work where you want, when you want, how you want, as long as you're satisfying your client's needs. We cut out the bureaucracy of having to be in partnership meetings, having to be seen at our desk 9 to 5. I mean, we all have stories of this, don't we, right? Where we thought, hey, if I come in on a Saturday and work the same hours as that supervising partner, I'm going to be seen, and that's going to be important to the ultimate longevity of my career here. I did that. I did that for 4 years. I worked every Saturday. You don't have to do that in a virtual firm. Everyone comes into our firm as a partner. And we'll talk about a few different virtual firm models in a moment. But I found it to be extremely important from our firm perspective that people are coming in as a partner with their own book of business. And I think that's important because I love the model where we as partners or senior attorneys are actually mentoring and supervising and supporting younger attorneys, right? That is a great model by which our profession actually was established. You never went to law school back in the day. You just learned from another attorney how to do the work. The reality is, though, that I think that's really hard to do in a virtual firm concept. I think if you're in a separate spot from someone who's more junior to you, it's really difficult to monitor and keep that workflow and keep that consistency that you want to have with the client's actual work product. We make more money in a virtual firm, and the really key component to this is business development. We all have to hunt and fish every day. Even if you have an institutional client, you have to continue to keep that client happy, and you have to make sure that if that client goes away, you're going to have the ability to backfill that client with another client. And so one thing that I know I struggled with at my firms, and I think firms do a really horrible job of doing, is actually teaching business development. So one of the ways in which we ensure that we all see each other and create our relationships and continue our relationships is every other month we gather for a business development seminar for a 2 to 3 hour period over lunch. And we talk through who we're actually targeting, what pitches do we want to give, who can go with us on that pitch, who knows somebody at that firm or that company. And we basically create a business development plan at the beginning of the year that we try to implement and hold each other accountable for throughout the year. A little bit different than your traditional firm. If you were here earlier today, Caddy talked about the culture, right? She talked about branding, and the gentleman before her talked about culture and why that's really important, culture and branding. And it's really important, both of them talked about, for happiness. And I think it's really important to have a non-toxic culture, because what we implemented in the virtual firm that we found was pretty groundbreaking was consistent communication. Consistent, clear, as transparent as possible communication. Now that sounds like a no-brainer. It sounds like that's just, yeah, right? We all know how to communicate. We're attorneys. We have to communicate all the time to our clients. But the reality is that communicating to those you're supervising or those that you're relying on to work on matters together is not always so easy, and especially not easy when you have to have those difficult conversations with your fellow attorneys. And so consistent communication is one of the key values that our firm has. Transparent and open. We have 5 formulas. 5. And everybody knows when they bring a client in which formula that matter is going to fall under in order for them to be compensated. It's not rocket science. I'm not making all this stuff up. Maybe some of it has a little bit of magic to it because we tweaked it a bit for our own uses. But I will say that when you have a transparent and open compensation formula, people have the knowledge of what the expectation is for them, and they have goals that they can set. And gosh, how about this? They also can have a budget for their year, knowing what they're going to make based on what they're bringing in. There's no discretionary bonus at the end. There's no side formulas, which I'm sure we've all worked in those firms before. I know I have, where you find out, at some point in your career, Joe over here has got a little side deal with the firm that they're making X on each matter that you were never given that opportunity to have. Our formulas are in our partnership agreement, and they're very, very clear. The last component of that is we're paying people what they are worth. Look, if you're in a traditional law firm model, that's great, and I'm hoping it's working for you, and I'm hoping you're happy. But for me, I found it really important to my self-worth and what I value as a person to be paid exactly what I know I'm worth. And I'm worth a lot. And I don't just mean that by how much money I make. I mean, that's one component of it. That's obviously a criteria by which one can judge themselves. But I actually mean more than just what I'm being paid is how I am treated. How am I treating others? What level of respect exists in that culture? What level of appreciation that we talked about earlier is lacking in a toxic culture? And for me to have the ability at any point to go work somewhere else, whether that's in Spain or whether that's from my home, or not be necessarily coming into an office where I have to have FaceTime for a partner or for an executive compensation formula that works only for that firm, to me, that's an invaluable aspect of what I have in my practice. I'm going to talk about women's compensation here for a minute, and that does not mean that any of the men in this audience can tune out. But I'm going to talk about it because it really is a problem, and I know you all have heard this before. There's a serious gender gap between what men and women make. And I obviously have experienced this, and I am sure most of the women in this room have experienced it. And here's why this is important. Over a woman's 47-year career, a woman's total estimated earnings loss compared with men is, if you're at a high school graduate level, you're going to lose out on $700,000. If you're a college graduate, you're going to lose out on $1.2 million. And if you're a professional school graduate, like an attorney, you're going to lose out on $2 million. Now, I occasionally will talk to people, and they'll tell me the following. They'll say, you know, I have a pretty decent-sized book at my firm, and I'm relatively happy there. And I don't think I could leave. I said, great, I'm really glad. I'm glad you're happy. I'm glad that's going well. Now, why don't you think you could leave? Well, they really appreciate me there. Okay, great. Do you mind if I ask what your book is? Yeah, it's about $1.3 million. This is an actual conversation I had with a woman. That's awesome. Congratulations on a $1.3 million book of business. Do you mind sharing with me what you're compensated? Oh, $375,000. Why do you feel that they appreciate you? Oh my goodness, well, you know, so I'm a rainmaker, and so I have associates working for me, and I have an assistant, and you know, they really make sure that I'm taken care of at the firm so I can grow this book and maintain this book. And I thought to myself, yeah, of course, they have a vested interest in making sure you can grow that book and maintain that book. But why are you not being compensated what you're worth? If your book is 1.3 and you're only making 375, is that not somewhat problematic to you? And so what I find a lot when I talk with people, especially when I talk to them about our virtual model, is I will say that a lot of folks believe that they are appreciated at their firm, and their appreciation is directly tied to the prestige of that firm. I think that's great. If you literally want to be brainwashed, I think that is great. If, however, you'd actually like to be paid what you're worth, then I think you need to have a really strategic conversation with the management at your firm. And I don't think you should settle for less than what you are really, truly worth. So, let's talk a little bit about growth in virtual law firms. Now, many of you sitting in the audience are unlikely to go out and start your virtual law firm tomorrow, and I know that, right? That's okay. And I'm not here to advocate that everyone in this audience should go start a virtual firm. But what I want to tell you about virtual firms is they are coming, and they are here, and they're not going away. And you might just want to consider whether this might be an option for you, if not now, maybe sometime in the future. Because here's what's happening in the virtual space. You can see here by these statistics, there are the top, what I would say the top 4 virtual law firms. You can see that Culhane Meadows had 1,200% growth over a 5-year period. Fisher Broyles had a 203% growth over a 5-year period. Potomac had 204, and Ramon had 200%. My own law firm, in its inception of 10 months, had a 500% growth rate. Now, let's be real about that. I started the firm, and 5 people joined me. It's not a huge number, I get it, but it is indicative of these numbers. And virtual firms are growing anywhere from 150 to 1,000% a year. Does anyone want to guess? And I don't know if I have it here on the slide. Yeah, they are. Darn, I put it on the slide. So domestic firms are growing at a rate of about 1% to 2% per year. And actually, I've seen it be as high as about 2% to 5%, but that's your traditional law firm model. And this is, of course, talking about attorney growth, right? How many attorneys are growing and adding to that firm per year? I think those are phenomenal numbers. And I'm obviously here to talk about my model, but these are all great models too, because these are all virtual models. I want to highlight one in particular, which is Fisher Broyles. Fisher Broyles started about 20 years ago, and I don't know, is anyone here in the audience familiar with them? I don't want to give, okay, good. A couple of you are, just a few. So it started about 20 years ago. They hit the AmLaw 100 with 80 million in revenue last year with over 300 attorneys. So I'm not talking about my little 6-attorney firm only. I'm also talking about virtual firms that are getting to the level where, if you will, they'll start playing with or at the same league of the big boys. So I think other attorneys are finding that this virtual model works for them, clearly, right? The numbers, I think, are indicative of that. And these models range, right? The really great thing about a virtual model is you can create it for what works best for you and what you think is going to work best for the particular model that you're adapting. I know Fisher Broyles, I believe, started in, I think, the Boston area. They're national. Culhane Meadows is actually a group of attorneys that were at Fisher Broyles, and they broke off and started their own thing. And then Potomac is in the DC area, and Ramon is in the Bay Area, Silicon Valley. So, you know, there's plenty of other virtual firms out there. I'm highlighting these because the statistics were there on them, which I think are really compelling. And they have been around for quite a bit longer than my firm has. So it's something interesting to watch, and it's, I think, very interesting to think about in terms of what the future of law practice is going to look like. Here's, again, just the list of the 5 major firms. I added a 5th one. It's Taylor English Duma, and they are actually out of Atlanta. And some of these firms they're not completely virtual. Ramon, for instance, started out completely virtual, and then they now have an office space. Taylor English actually was a traditional firm that morphed into a virtual firm, so they do have a main office in Atlanta. And I think, you know, one of the issues that we highlighted here about culture, and that I think you all might be thinking a bit about, and I'd love to hear your thoughts at the end, is how difficult is it to sustain a non-toxic culture, even in a virtual firm? And I know it's something that these firms have grappled with. A lot of their founders have talked about it. I, myself, and my COO are always considering what our culture looks like and how to make it better. You take away just the fundamentals of, hey, we're going to pay people what they're worth. We're going to be clear and consistent and transparent with how we communicate and how we have our partnership and our compensation formulas. And then there's still that intangible, right? What Caddy talked about with your brand, about how do you ensure that your stress is lower and your self-confidence is high and you're happy. And we think having these essential components of, you know, I unabashedly will say, my firm is based on the value of you are being paid what you're worth, unabashedly. One of my highest values is money. And I think it's really important for everybody in the room to recognize that that is not a bad thing. It's a really challenging thing for me as a woman to say, because women are generally socialized not to talk about money. But you were also talking to a woman at 10 years of age who lent out money to her older sister and charged her 10% interest. So there is that, right? I have a little bit of entrepreneurial spirit in me from a young age, and I've always enjoyed money. And there is nothing wrong with that. If you're going to sit and think that it's bad to think about money, it's bad to ask for more money, it's not detrimental to only be making 50 or 30% of what you're bringing into your firm, that's okay. If that's what your shtick is and that's what you're comfortable with, that's great. That was not something I felt comfortable with. So I think these virtual firms would say, based on the statistics we saw, that, hey, they feel like winners, right? They feel like they've created a compensation model that is attractive to other attorneys. They're obviously growing. All of those firms are full-service firms. They're not boutiques, and they're doing really well. Where I think this is also super important is millennials. And I'm not a millennial. I'm a Gen X. But millennials, I believe next year will compose 50% of our workforce. And the oldest millennial is now 35 years of age. So at about 35 years of age, if you started in the normal course that most of us did, going through law school and starting at a law firm, you're at that point in your career where you're starting to actually create a viable book of business. I don't have to tell anyone in this room, if you've picked up a Time magazine, a Newsweek, or watched CNN, that millennials are not like us. And when I mean us, I mean anyone who's not a millennial. And that's okay. Right? I actually think millennials have it right on some level. Thank you to the millennials. Thank you. The shout out. I appreciate that. Because a lot of millennials don't want to become partner. I mean, we've read this, right, in the law journals and the articles that are out there. They don't care about making partner. They don't want to work as hard as maybe some Gen X and baby boomers did. They see the stress that we've gone through. They note the suicide and substance abuse and depression rates, and they go, you know what? Do not sign me up for that. That is not why I went to law school. That is not what I want. And so I honestly think, and I'm hopeful, that millennials are the future of virtual law. And not to say that only millennials will benefit from virtual law, but I think they're going to be more embracing and adaptable to it because, as I mentioned earlier, they don't have this prestige issue. They don't care if they necessarily went to this awesome law school and are necessarily at this top 100 AmLaw law firm. They really care about the value that they're bringing to their practice. And I think they're going to be the ones that are going to start to change the face of how we practice law. Because again, the fundamental concept that I'm promoting here today is I think the traditional firm model is broken. I think it serves no one well. It doesn't serve the clients well, and it doesn't serve the attorneys well. And let's talk about the clients for a minute. Jack talked yesterday about the Legal Trends report and how they did that study and they did that exercise where they called out to 1,000 firms and as a potential client, and 84% of those that they reached out to did not respond within 24 hours or reply to the inquiry for a potential client. I don't think that is an issue with the attorneys not desiring to bring on new clients. I could be wrong, but I think it's because we're overworked, we're stressed, and we're just tired. And we're not really happy with the firm in which we're existing that is not either compensating us or appreciating us or being clear and concise with language and communication and not giving us what we need to thrive as humans. So I don't think it's about, gee, we're just not calling people back. There's a reason why people are not calling people back, because we were all obviously schooled throughout law school and as we went through our firm careers to obviously be conscientious and not treat any potential client or existing client in a negligent fashion. I really think it's that we just are too stressed, overworked, and tired. So millennials may show us the way. To the millennials in the audience, I hope you will show us the way. We're waiting, we're excited. Just start building that book. I want to end this by challenging you to think about where you are currently in your life and where you want the remainder of your career to go. I went through this process when I decided to leave my law firm, and I frankly did not have a good choice in when I decided to leave. I had been discriminated against because I was of childbearing age. I was discriminated against because I wasn't being paid equitably. And I didn't have really any other choice other than to potentially become a solo. I did not want to go into another law firm. Even though that other law firm was willing to pay me $100,000 more, I knew it was going to be a lot of the same. And so I think virtual firms have that opportunity to offer a different choice, to practice law in a different way that I hope will allow you live a more humane life as an attorney and have a happier, satisfactory career. Thank you for your time. So I'm more than happy to take questions. We ended a little bit early, and I did that on purpose because I wanted to ensure there's an opportunity to raise any questions that folks have. Yes? Right. So the question was, so thanks for we have a microphone circulating too. So the question was, if you have an existing traditional office space and you own the building or you're renting and you're already paying people a certain high compensation amount, how do you know or how can you equate what that attorney should be paid, what they're worth, based on really coming from a traditional model, right? Did I get that question right? Yeah. That is a hard situation. right? And a lot of folks, if you own the building or you have a long-term lease, you may not be able to get out of it. But I think there's other options there, right? So if you can, one firm that I worked at, they started to job share offices. So sharing office space, getting that amount of rent or that square footage of your office down into a more manageable level. Gosh, I don't want to put anyone out of a job, but we don't have a receptionist at the virtual firm. We have a virtual admin. I mean, she is a real person, but she works off-site. And there's just so many other ways to economize, to allow for less overhead that, and obviously you're here at the Clio conference, so you're already technologically savvy. You already know about some of these technological advances that are there. But I think trying to implement some of those, and I would look to some of those virtual firms like Ramon, Taylor English, who are doing that hybrid, and how have they found that to be beneficial?
We have a question in the back.
Yep.
No, one behind you.
Yeah, thank you.
Stand up.
I have a virtual firm, all women, and if I tried to pay them 70% of what they earned, I would definitely be in the red. So now I do have associates, but just the cost of software and malpractice and our assistant and all the other things, professional development, how do you, is it 70% after they pay for their share of expenses, or how do you account for that?
Sure, it's a great question. Allison, my COO, is in the front row, and I hope I get it right. And if I don't, she'll tell me. But no, what we do is we do take 30% off the top for overhead, obviously. That's the equation, right? We do pass a lot of costs back to the attorney. So this stems also from my disincentive to want to pay for people to have membership at country clubs. We don't pay for people to join organizations. We don't pay for tables at those organizations. So we do push some of those costs back onto attorneys. However, we feel those are fair costs, because how many of us have been invited at the last minute to go to a nonprofit fundraising dinner where the firm bought a table because there's one person at the firm who's on the board there, and now that's a firm cost everyone has to be paying for. I personally find that to be inequitable and not a good use of the firm resources. So we encourage, of course, those sorts of business development, but those are attorney costs that they have to pay for. More specifically to your question, though, we do pay for malpractice insurance. We do pay for the software that we obviously have the attorneys use. Clio, we use NetDocs as well. There are a lot of startup costs, I will say that. We are in the black, but not by a lot. And mainly, and this is no reflection on you, I'm sure you have an amazing CFO, but we have an amazing CFO. And she has kept us really on target to make sure that we're very judicious with what we spend our money on. Now, it's interesting because Fisher Broyles, and I hate to keep using them, but they're a great example because they've been around the longest. They actually started out paying their attorneys 90% of what they were actually collecting. I think Culhane Meadows, that group that I mentioned, broke off. I think they left when Fisher Broyles turned that compensation model to an 80% model. Because they were obviously really happy with the 90% and now they weren't getting that. So I love the fact that you have a virtual firm and you're paying your folks 70%. I'd be happy to talk with you afterwards about the economies of that and maybe how you could look at it or shave a little differently. But it's, we're not flowing in money, but we are in the black. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Great. We have one more question back here.
Thank you for bringing these very important issues out in the open. I finished law school when I was 45 years old, and so I had a little different perspective on this, and I saw that it really is a pyramid scheme. But I've also noticed that we have that throughout our economic society. We look at teachers who are totally abused personally and financially, but their administrators not so much. We have USDA scientists, EPA scientists who are having to convene away from their job, sometimes even losing their jobs. The people that make the guts of what we produce are not being either compensated or appreciated appropriately. we need to be saying this. I am 66 years old, and I'm not willing, thank you, to wait for the millennials to do this for us. We need leadership here, and I think that this conference is always inspiring to me, but this is a place where we must realize that we do have the power to change it. We change it by example, and just keep going. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. I appreciate that.
Hi. I also want to thank you for coming and speaking out the way that you are. I think it takes a lot of bravery and courage, and I think a lot of women don't do that. So thank you as well. My name's Beth Leibowitz. I have a virtual law firm that I launched about almost 3 years ago, which has been doing very well. I love the model. I had a very similar story to yours, actually, where I was like, wow, I can quit my job and make a lot more money, which is kind of crazy. But I firmly believe the traditional law firm model is completely broken, and I spent a lot of time thinking about that from the client side. So I'm an outsourced GC, flat monthly fees. I don't bill by the hour. And I recently launched a marketplace for other attorneys who want to practice in the same way. And the model there is keep all of your revenue. Here's my model. Do this. It works for the client. We're an expense on your expense list. So I'm super excited about that. That just launched this year about a couple weeks before I had my second baby. So that was fun too. But my question for you is on the virtual law firm side, because one of the challenges I have is bringing partners on, because I believe they should be partners. But how do you deal with the origination question? Do you have an origination split for when an attorney brings new money or new clients in? And how do you kind of tie that in with your expense formula?
So I'm glad you raised the origination question. The single most aspect of compensation that attorneys are displeased with in their law firm environment is based on origination credit. And I, of course, and one of my partners who's here today actually have both experienced discrimination based on origination credit. And I'm sure many of you have as well. So the way that we do it is we have an origination formula. If you bring in a client and you give that to somebody else at the firm who that's their specialty area and you're not going to be working on it because that's, you do tax and they do real estate, then you are going to get 20% of all of that which is collectible from that client. So you have I think we actually do 20% to the firm for overhead on that, then 20% to the originating attorney, and then the remainder of that, which is 60%, to the attorney that's actually working on that matter. We also have a limitation on that formula. I'm a transactional attorney, so if you brought in a matter, you would have that origination formula apply to that transaction for 2 years, not the life of that client, and not the life of that matter. We're all familiar with the what is it called, the tree of the origination tree, and you bring in a client and everything that sprouts off from that tree in a law firm environment traditionally goes back to that original attorney that brought in that client. We don't believe in that. We believe that you bring in the client, and each matter that comes off of that client may have a different origination go to a different attorney. So the tax attorney brings in and gives it to the real estate attorney. The real estate attorney maintains that relationship, grows that client, you hope, and then eventually spawns off a litigation matter. That real estate attorney would get the origination on that new matter, not based on the client and based on the originating attorney for that client or matter.
We have a gentleman at the front.
Yes, to piggyback on, I think, 3 questions ago, when you're factoring in your overhead, which obviously is the 30%, is there also a factor in for the costs that were associated with the case or the matter? And if so, where do you draw the line with paper or whatever? But I mean, deposition costs, things like that, how do they factor into the formula?
Sure. So those are costs generally that are going to be borne by the attorney, and if possible, and it's appropriate, passed on to the client. So a deposition cost, a service cost, servicing, filing fees, that sort of thing. Does that address that question?
Well, I mean, but then do you subtract that amount So say it's passed on to the client pays it all, but then does the total amount that comes in for that matter, the attorney gets 70% even though some of that was paid by the client for costs?
Correct. So all of the partners at the firm are K1s, if anyone needs the IRS formula issues, but they're K1s. And so we would keep track of any costs that had to be put out before we're actually collecting on that client. And then that would be deducted from the distribution that goes to that attorney, right? Or I should say reimbursed to the distribution that goes to that attorney if those costs had to go out ahead of time.
So one last thing. So then do you not pay every 2 weeks or?
No, we pay monthly.
Okay.
Yep. We really look forward to the 15th of the month.
All right. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, so that's a good clarification. The 70% is on the services, not the actual expenses. So you're collecting on your invoice and you're getting 70% for the services she provided. Yes?
Is there a good way to track the allocations in Clio? Responsible attorney credit,
So can you turn off
Maureen.
taping so Jack doesn't see this? So no. In
that's
answer
a
to your
challenge.
question, no. We have our CFO use a spreadsheet. And I'm really, really, really reluctant to have that situation because one of the pieces of advice, so I am being mentored by someone who has existed in a virtual firm for many, many years. And one of the pieces that I said to him when I started the firm, I said, what would be your one most important piece of advice that I learned from you? And he said, do not create spreadsheets to track the originations and the formula credits and all of that. He's like, it is a complete mess. We have looked, and if anyone out there is knowledgeable and has some information about this, I would love to talk to you afterwards. We have looked for a software program that could do that, and we have not found one. We have not taken it to Clio because we feel like it's different and what most firms would want or expect. But it's probably on our list to eventually take Clio. So, no.
We have time for one more question.
Yep.
Yes, sir.
Just one short comment. Bring it to Clio. It is actually very, very helpful. I believe that a lot of law firms will benefit from it. That's all.
Okay, we will. We'll bring it. That's all right.
Have time for one more question then.
You all email them the same. I'd love it.
Yeah, I'm just curious, do you have paralegals and support staff, and if so, how do you compensate them?
Yes, so that's a great question. So we don't currently have any employees, and that's, again, a terminology that one will be familiar under the tax law and what that means, right? We don't have any W-2 employees. We eventually believe we will hire employees, but if someone needs a paralegal, I, as a real estate and land use professional, use a planner on many of my cases, case data entry people, that sort of thing. Those people are independent contractors, and I'm not here to debate the recent case and even the statutory changes that the state of California just implemented through SB 5. But we use a lot of independent contractors at this point, and it's mainly because of the size of us. We simply don't have a need for employees. However, we do have a formula that when we do start hiring employees, then the attorney will also benefit off of a paralegal or a case assistant, or in my case, a planner that they're billing out and collecting on. They will also, in that formula, get a percentage of the income that's coming in off of those people that are billing on their behalf. Okay, we have about a minute left. Any other additional questions? All right, thanks you guys. Good luck.